Joe Rogan has become one of the most influential podcasters. And as he's become so big and prevalent, especially now more in the political space, it's caused it to be more a part of the political discourse, right? So then we're keeping up in this part of the media. We're keeping up with what's going on with Joe Rogan more often. And something's going on with Joe Rogan, okay? And a lot of people have been asking sort of what happened to him. Because I remember when I was a little bit younger, tuning into his podcast sometimes and hearing a guy who was open to different point of views and who often was more skewed in the liberal direction, but of course had his more culturally conservative streaks because of UFC and eating an all-meat diet at some point and stuff like that. But it wasn't the overt pro-MAGA stuff that we're seeing all too often on his massively influential podcast now. And so again, the big question that people will ask is what the heck happened to him? And you have to see this video that was put together, a compilation of old Joe Rogan. And you'll see a couple minutes into it, him just destroying Trump for the reason that I beg people to go after Trump for. And he does it in that sort of Joe Rogan type of way, just casually going, no, Trump's like terrible. And what happened to that? I'll explain. We'll go through it. But first, let's watch this. While you are, please do click that subscribe button.
I really believe if Michelle Obama runs, she wins.
She's good.
She's great. She's the wife of the best president that we have had in our lifetime. I've never voted right wing in my life. I consider universal basic income a really good idea. I want free college education.
Take it easy.
Hello, Bernie.
How are you, Joe?
Wonderful. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I like Tulsi and I like Bernie. That's it.
Oh, yeah?
Everybody else can eat shit.
Look at you, fucking progressive.
Yeah. I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. I think he's looking out for the interests of the working people. And I think he wants people to have a better life and do better. And I'm all for that. And if that means I have to pay more in tax, like people think, oh, you're a socialist. I've heard people say that. Oh, you're a fucking socialist, bro. Like, first of all, he's not even a socialist. He's a democratic socialist. It's a different thing. I would like to spend more in taxes if they could fix inner city communities and take these poor neighborhoods and throw a fuckload of money. Spend more, you fucking Republican piece of shit. 87% of scientists said that human activity is driving global warming. I'm very pro-choice. I'm very women's rights, civil rights, gay rights, trans rights. I'm even universal health care. Obviously, this protected status is driving me crazy. This thing that Trump's doing with children that were born in other countries and then brought over here as children, and then they're talking about deporting them. That drives me fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's
that kind of shit. And the hard right version of that is despicable. These people that I see online, why didn't they apply for citizenship? Oh, who knows? Maybe because they're fucking 13. I don't give a fuck if they broke the law. You don't take parents and kids and separate them. You just fucking don't. You know Alonzo?
No, who's that?
Funny comedian.
Yeah.
He goes, not all Donald Trump supporters are racist, but all racists are Donald Trump supporters.
He definitely awakened that side.
But
see,
the January 6th thing is important.
See, it is important,
And
but is it the 6 months later? Should be the ruling number one conversation of journalists?
I think it's really important. And one of the reasons why I think it's important because it highlights the reasons why a guy like Donald Trump is so fucking dangerous. Is because a guy can incite a bunch of morons to do something really fucking stupid. But as far as
That's the key part. A lot of this is interesting, and I'll respond to it, but just a little bit after that, he started saying, why are we focusing so much on January 6th? Maybe because it was the climax of an effort to overturn an election illegally.
trans people, some trans people listening to this, I got nothing but love for you. For everybody. And in fact, Eddie Izzard is one of my all-time favorite guests.
Oh, I love Izzard.
The right-wing thing is just an easy way to dismiss me, because I'm not right-wing. I can't recommend your book, Race Matters, enough.
So, okay, I don't know if my response is going to be exactly what you might expect. It's not necessarily, there's always a chance of this, but it's not, oh, it's because he's grifting. Or this is some 4D chess way to make more money, to appeal to a certain group. He was doing great when he was more balanced or was willing to bring on guests of different point of views more politically. And obviously his podcast isn't explicitly political, but it goes there a lot of times. And it became a big discussion right before the election because Trump went on and got sort of a softball interview and Harris decided not to. And I think she should have gone on. But it was an example of how the Rogan and podcasts like his that speak to an audience that aren't just explicitly political viewers, right? Like you watch the show to get political takes. A lot of people just watch Rogan for the entertainment and to hear about fitness stuff and UFC and comedians. And then the politics becomes a little side dish that is really influential for those influenceable people, for people who aren't paying attention to politics as much, but then they hear something on Joe Rogan's and it sticks with them. And we've seen him, especially since the pandemic, lean into more overtly right-wing conversations and talking points than ever before in his career. It's not that before he was explicitly liberal and then he swung like we see with some people, but instead, I think, and this is my big thesis, that he is representative of a lot of just guys in the country, just dudes. And what happens is a lot of people, I'll show you data on this in a second, they admit they just get their political information mostly from social media, family, friends, right? Their family talks about something and they sort of, all right, yeah, I guess I'll vote that way. And for Joe Rogan, you've always seen this with how he's interacted with discussions, that he's really easy to influence. And so when he used to be more interested in bringing on people of different perspectives, his natural compass maybe pointed a little bit more to the left on some of these things. And while everything in that video, I'm sure he doesn't denounce now, he's definitely created an ecosystem of conversations that when it touches on politics, it's way more frequently overtly right-wing. And this is the more important part, way more frequently pushing just false notions and narrative. How many times have we seen when his producer Jamie's able to catch him saying something like it's absolutely true? Oh, Biden staged, pre-recorded the State of the Union address, and you could tell because of his watch. And all it took was Jamie looking up, that's not true. Or a lot of his vaccine and COVID-related things, which I think is when he got really radicalized. He is easily fact-checked on these. And his defense is always, oh, well, I'm just a guy. I don't know. Anytime he gets caught saying something wrong, his defense is just, I'm not proclaiming to be an expert, so don't hold me to that standard. I'm just talking. But even with the size of my platform, not to mention the size of his platform, you have to feel some responsibility, even if I weren't doing an explicitly political show. You got to feel responsibility not to mislead people. And if you're going to wade into the waters of politics, which you don't have to, but if you're going to, which Rogan does, then that responsibility is so important. And you're going to bring on Trump, who previously you called so effing dangerous, correctly, and not even press him on how dangerous it was for him to try to overturn a free and fair election. Not just with what took place on January 6th, but all the stuff leading up to it, the actual illegal schemes that had some shot of working but failed because of the people who were in Trump's administration who won't be this go round. So then what did happen? He got into a right-wing social group. That's the best conclusion I can come to. People want to scream grifter. I think we need to be a little bit more mindful of when we use that term, because someone like Rogan was making so much money and had so much influence before this right-wing shift. It's unlike some people like Tulsi Gabbard, who was falling out of relevance, and you can see, oh, as she's gone more right-wing, she's gotten more relevant. That could have been the incentive structure that led her to doing a grifty shift to the right. But we have to use that term very mindfully and wisely. I think we need to assume everyone is coming at it genuinely unless we have overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And then we can just say, you're genuinely expressing wrong, bad views, right? Someone can be genuinely just wrong, which is most people who I disagree with, is the category I put them in instead of you're just a grifter. And that's the story of Joe Rogan. And I think it's a really important one for us to watch because in his case, it has such massive repercussions because of the audience he speaks to, but it can give us insight into how this happens on a micro level, which is that a guy like Rogan, who isn't their heart and their core values aren't explicitly right wing, but they fall into most likely a sort of right wing or right wing adjacent social media bubble, or their social circle, if you like certain activities and hobbies that for some reason have been associated with conservative politics, you'll never even engage that actively with politics, but you'll all of a sudden identify yourself with Trump. So UFC has been a huge example of this. There's no reason you can't like UFC and vote for Vice President Harris, but it's become an ecosystem that right-wingers have really invested in making explicitly right-wing. Trump showing up there and aligning himself with some of those figures. Joe Rogan now being one of them. So what's the takeaway? One of my goals personally, I don't know if it's immediately Joe Rogan, but on platforms like his, I want to show up there more. I want to try to appear in places that aren't just speaking to mostly people who already agree with me. And there are a lot of folks I know personally who listen to Joe Rogan and go, oh, some of his right-wing stuff's a little funky. I know one personally who voted for Harris, but may not have if they didn't know me personally, and notices just how much politics is now present on Rogan in a way that is really beneficial to MAGA. Not because there's some malicious scheme going on, but because Rogan, like most Americans, are subject to not peer pressure, but peer influence. You're around people, so they end up influencing what you think. And he started befriending more and more right-wing people. And then what I really do think happened is when he started saying some things on vaccines and COVID and got backlash that made him really upset, that then made him shove out conversations with liberals. And then he just was insulated by only conservatives in most of those political discussions. But to emphasize what I'm talking about, we talked about this before, NBC News. Voters who say they follow politics closely lean more significantly Democratic. So you have follow closely goes 5 points in Democrats' direction. For do not follow politics closely, you are 14 points in Republicans' direction. So if you're voting Republican, you're more likely to not actually keep up with politics as much. And there's other interesting data points there as well. And then there was this Northeastern study leading up to the election. Trump voters trusted friends and family over traditional media, Northeastern research finds. And so as we discuss a particularly prominent and impactful figure, there's the part of the way he's using his platform that's really concerning to funnel people in the right-wing direction without that being an overt scheme necessarily. But you also have Rogan, as we've all watched publicly, being subjected to what so many voters, disproportionately Republican, but so many voters are subjected to, which is just based on who you're bumping into, what social circles you run in, what podcasts you're listening to. You don't even think you're going for political information, but then you end up being skewed that direction. And you don't know why Trump's awesome, but you sort of just Trump. There's a vibe. The same guy I told you about who listens to Rogan talked about how in his social space, all the guys he's around, it's not like they're talking about policy and substantive discussion about politics, but there was a vibe about Trump that they felt like they aligned with. Where does that vibe come from? It's not out of nowhere. It was Trump's appearances on some of these conservative adjacent, non-overtly political, but political touching podcasts, right? It was some of those influencers putting their flag in the ground as a Trump supporter, and then other less fun to talk about things. I do think part of it is that Trump was a guy and his opponent was a woman. And so for a lot of the masculine men archetypes, it felt even more cool to align with Trump. And if we have our own takeaway, is wow, that's scary. And Rogan may be too far gone now, where so often he's just allowing blatant misinformation to spew on his platform. But let's use that as a call to action for us to make sure we're not abandoning those populations of people. There are a lot of open-minded people who just tune into Rogan because they like hearing about the carnivore diet or something. And if we can show up in those places, not abandon outreach to those places, maybe we pull the Overton window back in our direction. And then just to quickly address, lastly, some Trump voters would say, oh no, Rogan still has the same views. It's just the left left him. The left got so crazy. If he critically engaged with policy and the parties, there's no way you can make that argument. Are some left-wingers online going crazier and crazier? Yes. Do people in positions of power represent extremism on their side similarly? No. Right now, the Democratic Party has not been overrun, as shown by they'll scream about certain issues that the left believes in that Kamala Harris never made an issue. They'll say it's all about identity politics and trans this, that, and the other thing, when Harris's message was very much not that. But they project that onto her to convince themselves it's okay that they're going with the Republican Party that has been overrun by their extremist side. Both sides have extremism, but is it making it to positions of power the same? That informs us a lot as to which party is not perfect, not close to it, but the one that we should engage in our activism through. And the Republican Party actually has been sliding in a dangerous direction as it's been overcome by MAGA, extreme figures like Marjorie, and Trump himself. But once you fall into a social media bubble, as Rogan has, and a social bubble that gives you a vibe that you're aligned with one side, almost no amount of policy will pull you out of that, which is really scary, which is why we need to prevent it by aggressively reaching out, would be my conclusion. There you are. He's taking the side camera. Let me know what you thought all that in the comments. The timing's fine. And please do click the subscribe button.